This morning, and glad to be joined by the governor of the great state of Mississippi, Tate Reeves, in studio this morning. Good morning, Governor.
Morning, Richard. How you doing today?
Doing well. I really appreciate some of your time. A lot going on. I guess 5 days from now you'll be in Washington, D.C. for a pretty significant inauguration.
Well, it kind of feels like morning in America again. It's a exciting time to be a Mississippian. Exciting time to be an American, and I'm excited for the next 4 years of the Trump administration.
It's going to be interesting to see how quickly he is able to, with this new administration and the team that he's putting together, able to hit the ground running. We've heard a lot about there are going to be a lot of executive orders out of the gate. Tom Homan's going to go to work right out of the gate. But sometimes it takes a little while to get going. Why is this 4-year term going to be different than the last 4 years?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, and that is not only does President Trump have a unique perspective having served in the office, the people around him also have that same perspective, and they recognize that 4 years is short, and you've got to get going quickly. And I think if you look at how quickly they moved post-election to name his cabinet, how quickly the Senate now is moving to confirm his cabinet, it just all reeks of, we know what we're doing. It all reeks of competence. It all reeks of, this is our mission, and we're going to go accomplish it.
I don't think anybody would say, well, not anybody. I don't think Republicans would say we're thankful for the last 4 years of Joe Biden by any stretch. But is there a scenario where the effectiveness of Donald Trump can actually be greater in that there was a 4-year gap between his terms as opposed to going from 4 years directly into a second term?
Well, obviously, I don't wish the last 4 years in American history on any American, and certainly not on any Mississippian. The policy decisions that were made, and quite honestly are still being made, it is beyond ironic to me that the entirety of the Democrat leadership in Washington made a self-determination. The voters didn't decide, but the leadership in Washington and the Democrat Party made a decision that Joe Biden was not competent enough to sit for re-election. They threw him out in the middle of the election without a primary, but yet now he is sitting in the Oval Office signing executive orders. He is sitting in the Oval Office and literally letting people off death row that have committed horrific crimes. But he wasn't capable enough to run for re-election, but yet he's capable enough to do this. And it's just, January 20th cannot get here soon enough. It is, I would argue, un-American what they're doing right now. But I did have an opportunity to speak with the president a couple of days ago. And when you say that there are going to be executive orders signed on the day that he is inaugurated, I think there's going to be a lot of executive orders signed. I think they are ready. They are prepared. We're going to undo a lot of the horrific policies of the Biden administration on day one, and we're going to start seeing America rally back.
Visiting with Governor Tate Reeves this morning on the Gallo Radio Show. Let's pull it back to the state of Mississippi. When the session began last week, you put out a post on X that said number one priority was tax reform and eliminating the state income tax in Mississippi. We got House Bill 1. Trey Lamar is going to join us a little bit later, and we're going to talk in detail about what is in that bill later this morning. So the House has hit the ground running on that. Tell me about your role in crafting that piece of legislation in conjunction with the House.
Well, obviously, I don't have any official role in crafting any legislation. That's a function of the legislative branch of government. I have a group of individuals that work daily in the Capitol, that work with legislators. I've had many conversations over many years, quite frankly. If you go back and look, Chairman Lamar in the House and myself have both been advocating for the elimination of the income tax for over 10 years now. I mean, this is a process that begun in 2015 when we filed the Taxpayer Pay Raise Act in the Mississippi Senate back when I was lieutenant governor. And it's really all about one thing, and that is income. If you look at my State of the State address, my inaugural address in 2020 after I got elected, I said really to much chagrin of much of my staff, because nobody wants to point to one number. But I said, if you're going to judge my hopefully 8 years as governor, judge it by one economic stat, then please look at per capita income. It's all about driving incomes up for Mississippians, because if Mississippians have more money in their pocket, they have more ways in which to take care of themselves and take care of their families. And so per capita, just as an aside, per capita income up in the first 5 years of my term as governor, we're up about 35%. And so we also have a fundamental belief that if you want more of something, you ought to tax it less. We need more income in Mississippi. We ought to tax it less. That's the reason you hear us talk about the income tax as being a tax on work. We need more workers in our state, and one way in which to get more workers is for them to be able to keep a higher percentage of the money that they are earning. Richard, it's important to remember, and a lot of times politicians forget this, but government doesn't have anything that it doesn't first take from somebody else. And all we're saying is we're in the best financial shape we've ever been in. We're in the best fiscal shape we've ever been in. Let's let those earners, those individuals in Mississippi who are earning incomes, supporting their families, let's let them keep a little bit more of their money in their pocket. And oh, by the way, it just also happens to be true that a consumption-based tax is much more efficient than an income-based tax system. And certainly Chairman Lamar, Speaker White, now 6 of the 8 statewide elected officials have said that they support the elimination of the income tax in the state of Mississippi. So we've got a great momentum, and the bill that the Chairman Lamar is supporting passed the, as I appreciate it, passed the Ways and Means Committee yesterday and could come to the floor very soon.
Possibly as soon as today? I mean, I guess theoretically it could.
Yeah, don't ever get me to speculating on when the legislature's going to do anything. But certainly Chairman Lamar and Speaker White would be better to answer that question. But it is not unusual for a bill to pass committee on one day and then be brought to the floor the next day, or at least fairly soon.
When you talk about the elimination of income tax, obviously that's a significant source of revenue for the state. And you can't just wipe away a massive piece of revenue and not say, okay, well, where is that money going to come from? I don't know that the sales tax piece that's going to come from municipalities that goes to the state completely makes that up. So when you look at the places new revenue is going to come from, where are you focused?
Well, first of all, I don't think you have to assume that you have to find new revenue. First of all, if you look at where we are financially as a state, we have several $billion in either the rainy day fund or in our fund that we use to fund projects around the state. And the reason we have several $billion is because we have had budget surpluses in the $1 billion range now for many years in a row. This year, the expectation is that we are going to collect approximately $7.8 billion in total revenue for the general fund, $28 billion total if you include federal funds and special funds. But let's just focus on the general fund to now, $7.8 billion. And the budget that the legislature passed for this fiscal year is $7 billion. Now,
so $800 million
So you got
surplus.
$800 million surplus that you could just take that off the table immediately and not change one thing. Now, for people like me, we don't have to have a dollar for dollar. We ought to have a net tax cut. We ought to return money to the taxpayers. My last year as lieutenant governor, the total state budget was $5.8 billion. So the budget has increased pretty significantly in the last 5 years. And so there's a lot of opportunities for us to find savings and for us to continue to balance our budget.
We'll continue the conversation about the tax reform bill, House Bill 1, that cleared Ways and Means in just a couple of minutes. I want to quickly ask you about this just before we go to break. Drew Snyder ran the Medicaid program for you in Mississippi. You have spoken very highly of the job that he did. There are reports out there that he is going to run Medicaid at the national level just a quick thought on Drew and what he's accomplished.
Well, Drew Snyder is a professional, and in my conversations with the incoming administration, I'll just tell you that I don't know what the president's going to do. The president will make this decision, and certainly his picks to lead HHS, but they couldn't find a more intellectual, smart, conservative leader of any agency, including Medicaid at CMS, than Drew Snyder.
We will continue the conversation with Governor Tate Reeves on the other side of a short time out here. We'll talk a little economic development. It's been like 10 minutes and we haven't heard an economic development announcement. Is things slowing down? Maybe not. We'll get into that. We will ask him the question that we talked with Lars Larson about yesterday as well, about will the Mississippi flag be flying at full staff on Inauguration Day, and more. This is the Gallo Radio Show, Super Talk, Mississippi. As you get your day started, we are glad that you are with us for the Gallo Radio Show on Super Talk Mississippi, joined in studio this morning by the Governor of Mississippi, Tate Reeves. Certainly appreciate your time. There's plenty to cover. I do want to go back and one more thing on the House Bill 1 Tax Reform Bill, Building Mississippi Up Act. You know the legislature well. You served in that body for a long time as Lieutenant Governor. The House and the Senate don't always see eye to eye on things. Perhaps that sometimes the governor and the lieutenant governor don't see eye to eye on every issue. I don't know if you've heard that or not, but sometimes it plays out that way. The idea that the Senate is just going to take the bill as it's put together by the House and rubber stamp it and move forward seems unlikely. What do you anticipate from the Senate during this legislative session when it comes to eliminating the income tax and kind of a comprehensive tax reform?
Yeah, what I would tell you is that you're correct. It is very rare that a piece of legislation of this magnitude that is going to have this much impact and quite frankly has a lot of different moving parts in it, ultimately gets through the process and gets to my desk in exactly the same form that it started. And so what I would and tell you that I anticipate is if and when the House of Representatives passes the bill, which I'm hopeful will happen very soon, then it is then incumbent upon the Senate to let not only the members know, but let the people of Mississippi know what their plan is. What are their viewpoints on taxes? What taxes do they want to cut, or do they not want to cut taxes at all? And I think that's where we'll find ourselves, and at that point we'll have a lot more visibility into what the plans are. I hope that they understand how important it is to Republican voters that we have a long-term plan to move from this income tax model to a consumption tax model. There are some that would say, look, what the income tax is doesn't really matter. And here's what I would say when you think about our competition. We reduced our top rate. By the way, if you make up to $36,600 a year as a married couple in Mississippi, you pay no income tax. If you have retirement income in Mississippi, you pay no income tax on that income. I don't know why we would treat people who are actually in the workforce working any different than we treat those. But if you want to make the argument that the income tax doesn't matter, I would just submit that you look at what's happened in two of our neighboring states. We went to a income tax above $36,600 in taxable income at 4% flat rate. Last year, in Sarah Huckabee Sanders' first year in office, the state of Arkansas lowered their income tax to 3.9. Now, I'm sure that was just a random number that they picked out of the air. Now, soon thereafter, in the fall of 2024, Jeff Landry in Louisiana called a special session of the legislature, and they lowered their top income tax rate to 3.5%. Okay. Which, again, I am sure was just random, didn't have anything to do with what Arkansas had done or anything to do with what Mississippi had done.
Tax cut arms race.
The reality is it matters. It matters when you're looking at economic development. It matters when you're looking at population shifts. And a lot of other states get it, and I hope that there's enough will in the Mississippi Senate to recognize that.
I've spoken with both Speaker of the House, Jason White, and Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann. And I've been saying since October, when we first talked about this, that I'm not sure they're as far apart as some people want to make them to be. Lieutenant Governor Hosemann has talked about an incremental reduction over time. I finally asked him last week, I was like, what's the difference in what the House sees and the Senate sees? Is it simply making this law? And I think largely he agreed that was the difference, codifying it versus saying, yes, we are going to do this, but if something catastrophic comes along, we don't want to be tied to that. Do you see that as the difference?
Well, I will tell you that it is often the case that the differences are not as far apart as maybe it is portrayed in the media or even amongst those individuals that are playing. I have met with and spoken with both the leaders of both chambers very, very recently. Here's what I just want everyone to understand. The path towards elimination and codifying it is important. And the reason it is important is because for this governor or any other governor to go out and sell our state, there needs to be a path. There doesn't need to be additional action that has to be taken. And so if it's done smart, if it's done gradually, if it's done in the right way, I would argue that it needs to be done. It needs to be codified. We need to have a path towards the elimination of the income tax, because then we can go sell that. Because businesses and individuals make decisions as to where they allocate capital based upon 20, 30, 50-year decisions. It's not about the next year or two. But look, again, we're going to collect $7.8 billion this year. $7 billion is their budget from the current fiscal year. There's $800 million. We shouldn't be talking about 0.25% or 1/3%. We need real, meaningful tax relief that will help.
But you are on board with it being incremental, right? Not just wiping it off.
I am on board with doing it in a responsible way. I'm on board with getting it done over time, and I think most people understand that. But again, there's an $800 million surplus that we don't need a $50 million tax cut over the next 50 years when we have an $800 million tax cut right now.
Yeah.
That we could enact and still have the same budget, by the way. Again, this money is not the government's money. This is people's money across the state. Let's let them keep more of it.
3 years left in the governor's office for you. I would argue that your legacy, at least through this 5 years, has been economic development and the growth and the companies that have come to Mississippi. When you are looking at attracting big business to Mississippi, how do you weigh the balance between the tax breaks, the incentives, the abatements that are necessary to attract these businesses, usually over a long period of time, with the lack of corporate tax or whatever tax that they're going to be contributing immediately? How do you balance those two to make a $10 billion project make sense?
Well, I will tell you, when we came in and Bill Court came in, we sat down and we developed a ROI model where we do a return on investment on every single project, and we make a calculated decision as to whether or not any investment that is made primarily for infrastructure, whether it makes economic sense to do so. And if the answer to that question is yes, then we go out and we recruit and we work our tail off to ask them and convince them to locate in Mississippi. There have been projects, big projects that have made national news that we have looked at the ROI and simply said to the company or to their consultants that, look, we're not interested in this particular project. Not because we're not interested in it, it's just it doesn't make financial sense for us. Yeah. And so how do you do it? It's actually quite simple. It's a pretty simple financial analysis of ROI on inputs versus outputs. And over time, it's we hope to make good decisions. And I would argue that if you look at some of the successes that we've had, taking that approach is the right thing for taxpayers. It's also the right thing for our economy, and our economy is growing unlike any time in our state's history because of it.
To me, one of the things that's interesting about the economic development projects is they've been spread out across the state, right? I mean, you've had stuff that's come to the Golden Triangle. You've had the Marshall County project, obviously stuff in central Mississippi, stuff on the coast. There are areas in Mississippi that are struggling, whether you're talking about the Delta or parts of southwest Mississippi. And we've gotten messages saying, hey, when's the project coming our way? What would you say to people in that part of the state where there certainly is a need but you've also got a balanced workforce and all the things that go with it.
Well, what I would tell you is that, before I became governor, Mississippi has never had a project larger than $1 billion that actually happened, period. And we've had 4 projects in the last 2 years in excess of $2 billion. And so, and they've all been in different regions of the state. Yeah. But the reason I tell you that is because I went back over Christmas and just did a little bit of math, and there have been 23 to 24 counties in Mississippi since I've been governor that we have announced a project larger than $75 million. 24 counties across the state can brag that they've announced a project larger than $75 million. The reason that's important is because while a $75 or $150 million project may be a single or a double or maybe even a triple for the state, that project is a grand slam for a place like Corinth or a place like or a place like Grenada, where we've had several announcements. And so it's those projects that I get most excited about, those that are a couple $100 million, that a couple 100 jobs that really will help salvage small communities, because I think small-town Mississippi is what makes Mississippi special. And the more jobs with high wages in those communities, the better and the more likely they are to succeed. Mike
Johnson announced yesterday the Capitol flag will fly at full staff for the inauguration. Is Mississippi going to follow suit?
Yeah, we're definitely working on that right now, and we have federal laws that we have to follow, but I believe that all flags should fly at full staff on Inauguration Day.
Thanks so much for your time. Good to see you this morning.
Thanks, Richard. Always a pleasure.
Governor Tate Reeves, this is the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk, Mississippi.